Thank you. I'm honored to be here. I thank you for inviting me. I must say that I'm humbled by the fellow speakers. I've enjoyed everything I've heard, and I am happy to share with you who I am and what I've been doing for the majority of my life. Balance in the physical realm requires us to have an understanding, if not an acceptance, of both the visible and the invisible worlds, reincarnation, the idea of reaction versus action, and also, of course, the concept and the understanding of the vibrant electrical systems that we are, of course, all involved in. As Leonie explained who I am, I will say that I was born with the gift. I very rarely, in fact, I never ever called it clairvoyance because I'm a girl and I don't want to be put aside or thought oddly of. I remember as a child, maybe 7, saying something to my neighbor, this girlfriend, about what I could or could not do, and she was laughing so hard that, of course, I turned it into a joke. And so my parents were, of course, I was born in a Theosophical family, and they nurtured my ability. They did not exploit it, nor anyone that I met exploited it. But I was terrified, and so consequently, it was not a known ability, especially among my peers. I was influenced in the Portland area by Perry Karsten and Anna Berkey, Edith Karsten, and of course, Leonie's father, Harry Van Gelder, was incredibly important in my life. I met him when I was 7. My mother had cancer and he was practicing in Vancouver, BC. I'm 7 years old and I meet this very strange man doing very strange things. And I just remember thinking, gee, this is what I want to do. I think I want to be a doctor. So I never lost that idea, even though I didn't actually become one until I was 30. I sort of did a circuitous route as far as that was concerned. Basically, as a young girl with feet in both worlds, the most important thing was to discern the truth versus imagination. And I was very lucky. I had many teachers both in this world and in the other. But when you have feet in both worlds, it's sometimes difficult to be in this world. This world isn't so pleasant. This world, you see exactly what is there rather than what someone is actually saying. In the other world, it is exactly as it is to be. And even in the other world, when it's difficult, there's a logic to it. Here, there is not such a logic. Here we have malice, and we have hurt, and we have thorny thoughts. In the other world, it isn't such. In the other world, it is what is there is there. The true intent is obvious. So as a young girl, I had to learn to understand what someone was saying and what they were meaning, and making sure that I responded to what they were saying and not what they were meaning. Because if I responded to what they were meaning, then I would, of course, be in trouble, because they would understand, well, you understand. We've all done that. Throughout this beginning for me, I had many wonderful teachers, and I had many wonderful books. And probably the most profound for me was C.W. Leadbeater. As a girl, I read his books and I thought, oh my gosh, this is exactly, I remember in one of his books, excuse me, him talking about a rock. And I thought, my gosh, that's just exactly what I've seen with the rock. And so it was just like, he had this wonderful way with words, those of you who've read him, this wonderful way of explaining, and it was like a friend. And he was so easy to read, and I'm probably 12 as I'm reading these and 13 when I'm reading these, and I understood them and they made sense, and the things that didn't make sense my parents would help me understand. Dora Kuntz, of course, and her, you know, one of my favorite books was The Invisible World of Fairies, because of course as a child, fairies, or really just the little sprites, were so much fun. I mean, and they love children because children are not afraid, and we aren't even asking whether or not we see them. We just know we see them. And so probably those of you who have youngsters who maybe even have some of this ability, many times their imaginary friends are really not so imaginary. And I remember, and I've made this statement several times, but the little sprites, I mean, it would be, I mean, they were just so much fun. They'd just flit and be fun and show off and make pretty little colors. And you know, I'm a child and I think it's just wonderful. I still think it's wonderful, but they don't play with me like they did when I was a kid. I'm older now. Gnomes were also interesting, but not quite so interested in people. They're kind of exactly what they sound like. They're kind of brown and lumpy and are interested, but not really. Unless you're doing something for the grounds you're working, then they're interested in you, but mostly they're not that interested. Later on, we'll talk more about some of these other things. But as far as being raised as a Theosophist, of course, if I would have been born in any other family, you know exactly what would have occurred. I would have been on medication or in some institution. Because it's very difficult when you really do have vision to deny it. I'm not saying, I mean, it is basically something I do turn on and off. And of course, at this age, I have far more control than I did at that age. But it would have been very difficult for me to have been raised in any other atmosphere. As I speak to you, and as the work that I do, it is from experience that I am before you. And when I speak of balance in the physical world, I really am talking from a term and a being of the most important part in our lives, which is meditation. Meditation or prayer or quiet time or quiet thought is an important part of balance in this world. And we, in this beautiful Alcott, has got, as you know, this incredible deva, as many who have created these moments in the society they knew what they were doing in terms of attracting, and then we who join and we who continue this feel and this importance of study and understanding, we are actually feeding the deva. We are allowing her, I always call them her, not always are they, but it allows this deva to be filled and to, you know, it's kind of a two-way street. We fill them or her, and she then fills the world. When I was speaking earlier at Orcus Camp Intralaya is also a very important button. And those of you who do not live in Wheaton but maybe come to visit, your meditation room is never to be forgotten. And this is also, if you're not here, if you in your meditation visualize yourself in that room, you also feed that lovely button where we are here for the goodness of humanity, for the incarnation of all, and for the wealth of all of us. And I feel that the importance of connecting with the beautiful angelic kingdom is as important as the connection with, of course, each other. Of course, to keep myself on task, I have a few notes. So, in talking about the balance of the physical realm, we of course have to start with self, and we have to start with body. And we like to look at this lovely body. I like to look at it is in terms of, well, really 5 parts. This is the big CPU. You know, we want to keep this going because this is the guy that's going to keep all of us here. But I like to look at the right side or the right arm as the input. So the input is the water we drink, the air we breathe, and the food we consume. And so we have control over this right arm. We have control over mostly what we can breathe, and of course what we can drink, and of course what we can eat. So that's the right arm. The right leg is our elimination system, and that, of course, is this whole GI tract and making sure that we have a good elimination system. And it's also the ability to, the largest elimination system in our body, of course, is the sweat glands, and good exercise, and that wonderful flush of exercise is important. And so we can control that right leg. That right leg is something that we want to make sure, you know as well as I do, if we're backed up at all, we're in trouble. We need that, we need that whole system, eating well and eliminating well, either by skin or by other means. Now let's get over here to the left arm, and the left arm is the mental and the psychological and the emotional. And again, we can control it, but sometimes we don't like to. Sometimes we want to just, I don't know, let it have a kind of a way with it. So here's the emotional, the psychological, the thinking part of us. The left leg is what we came in with. It's our genetics. It's our karma. So out of the 4 parts, 3 of them we really can control. 3 of them we really can work with in terms of balance. The karma is simply, I am a culmination of many lifetimes. The fact that I have the ability to see beyond this life is obviously something that I acquired in another life or another life before that. I also understand the absolute gift of this, and I am incredibly respectful of this gift because I also know I could lose it, and I would be blind without it. It would be, I'm so used to it, it would be very difficult for me. Well, we all are, as we are all sitting here, we're the culmination of all of those lifetimes, and we are only as far as our slowest member. So we are, as I like to think of it, we are all incarnating at the same time, and so that's why, of course, we have these programs and the programs throughout the world to help us think and to help us achieve a certain level of personal enlightenment. And personal enlightenment is something to which I hope we all have, I know we all have, I can tell, experienced to some degree. Now, as has been said many times, Theosophy, of course, is the study of the esoteric side of life. I don't claim intimate knowledge. I have not studied Theosophy to the level that Joy Mills has. I have not studied Theosophy in those terms, but as a working Theosophist, I feel like I've incorporated it in my life, and it is who I am. It speaks to the real me. And when I speak to you, I bring that real me forward. Although, of course, there's certain nerves involved in any kind of a lecture. I'm trying really hard to kind of step aside from those nerves and just bring that person forward. As you who are watching me and experiencing who I am, you are actually showing me who you really are and not necessarily your personality, but who the true person is inside. That's the person, of course, who incarnates. I know that those of us, I've been very blessed in my life to have helped several pass over to the other side, and always towards the end of a person's life, it's just such a lovely experience because they've dropped all pretenses and inconsequential things. They're only interested in what really matters and what really matters at this very moment. And when I think of those, I say to myself, that's how I want to be now. And one of the mantras that I have for myself that I hope very much will spark an interest in you, which is, if you ask yourself the question, am I happy now? This very moment, are you happy in this very moment? The moment before doesn't matter, and the moment ahead doesn't count. This is the only moment that matters. And when I ask myself that question, I always say yes. It's really such a lovely feeling. And it's also an interesting thing, those of you who have experienced loved ones who have passed, those loved ones often will communicate with you. One of the most difficult things in my practice is when I have a patient who will come in to see me, and of course not all my patients are Theosophists. I mean, you know, I have lots who are regular folk, I don't know. I think we're regular folk too, but you know what I mean. And I remember very specifically, I was working on this young woman, and it had to have been her son in the room, and he says, oh my gosh, you could see me, tell her I'm here, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. And this woman doesn't know me, and I just mentally said, I can't. She doesn't know me, she would think I'm just, I said, find another way, please find another way. I know your mother would love to know that you're here, but that's sometimes the most difficult. But we all bring people with us. And I have found that most of us have at least two beings. So I remember, I think it was Michael who was saying that the conversation about, or was it you, Joy, that there were only 4 people in the room, and they said, oh no, it was full. Well, this room's really full too. And most rooms are very full, especially, I mean, it's real interesting walking down the halls. You know, and most of the people, because I'm not familiar with Wheaton, I do not know most of these people, but they seem very friendly and they seem very happy to be here. So, and sometimes they do perceive us and will present themselves in ways that we can recognize. And I know all of you have had those experiences. When I say the question and ask myself the question, am I happy with myself, or am I happy at this moment in time? Another aspect of that is the importance of thought. What are your thoughts? What is the intent of your thought? Recently, a very close friend of mine, Linda Jo Pym, passed away, and at her memorial, which was lovely, I thought she was, Gary, who uses, my husband, uses a walker, and it wouldn't be easy for him to be outside in the memorial service, so he stayed inside. And I thought, oh, I think she's inside. But I don't always open myself up, you do understand that, because that can be too much information. So I was just enjoying the memorial service, and then I decided that night I would just find out, gee, were you there, and were you with Gary? Oh yes, I was with Gary. Well, did you enjoy? Oh, I liked it. And did you enjoy what they were saying? Well, I didn't listen to the words, just the intent. I thought, well, now isn't that interesting? So, you know, it was just a confirmation to me that it is really the intent that matters. And even though I'm flooding you with these thought forms, in some instances they're just going through you because they're not finding a home. And in other instances, they are finding a home and it's resonating, and in turn, you're sending me back that information. Thought forms actually are forms. And it was, it's important that we acknowledge the words that we say, because behind the word is an intent. And it is important that we are true to that intent. And when we are with others and we take full responsibility for our words and our actions, they in turn will do the same. When I look at action and reaction, if we are true to our intent, we receive trueness back. If we are true in our actions, we receive trueness back. Part of this physical balance, we live in a physical world. And besides the importance of feeding myself correctly, eliminating correctly, having thoughts that are helpful, reading books that are inspiring, hearing lectures that are inspiring, it helps me along my karmic path. It helps me along my direction in life. And if I am balanced, I tend to bring balance with me. If you are the only one with peace in the room, it will be not long before another, and then another, and then another. The reverse can be true. With the clairvoyance, of course, yes, Joy, you're right, we all have auras. And we all have different looks to them, and they are, but it's true about, Dora's favorite statement, I think, is clairvoyance is overrated. After all, cats are clairvoyant. I rather like that. Cats are clairvoyant. I think about that with my cat. So let's talk a little bit about the thought forms again. In that, when you are having a conversation, and a conversation is two-way. This here is a lecture. A conversation is when you give back to me. And when we communicate, we then form a new idea. That's where creative thought occurs. This is the creation. And we've all had the experience of being so excited in that communicative spirit with that human in front of us, and all of a sudden this new idea is there. And from that idea comes more idea. We also have the experience in our life of not being able to communicate. Often it is with a family member and or a loved one, someone that you wish to communicate with. But it does not matter how you try, you just can't seem to communicate with them. It's not negotiating if only one of you are at the table. You both need to be at the table. If only one is at the table, then it's acquiescence. And that isn't communicating. Sometimes in our personal relationships, we do compromise because it is the only way that is practical. I'm a very practical girl. We need practicality in this world. We need to understand that sometimes it's not ideal, that boss we have. But the job's important. And it's a challenge, and the boss is a challenge. However, I guess my suggestion would be to work as well as you can your magic. Now, I use my night work for my magic. I have found it's very effective. Before I go to sleep, of course, I use meditation for my work. I use meditation for my balance. I use meditation in my life. This is who I am. So it's okay. It's life. When I have difficulty with someone, I can't seem to, you know how it is. You just can't, you don't quite understand. What I do is before I go to sleep, I mentally bring them to me, and I just put them in a lovely, I usually use white light. But if it's a lovely pastel color, it's whatever feels good at the time. And then I let it go. And I do it several nights in a row and see if that relationship won't improve. If it doesn't, it doesn't, but you've given it a good try. You haven't just turned your back, or worse, reacted. Let's speak of reaction. We all have our sore points. We all have, I don't like my ego because she gets in the way. She's a perfectionist, and you know, I really don't care for her. So what I love about my job is because it requires me to be very clear in what I'm saying to you. I can't bring her in the room. If I did, oof, never mind. I mean, she's fine, but she's just a taskmaster. I prefer this person who isn't worried about time or anything. She's just present and doing what she does best, whether it's reading someone or communicating or bringing the information forward. But those little egos that we've perfected get pricked sometimes. And we get a feeling about it, and then we want to defend it. I mean, have you all been in that position where you're defending that position? You're just defending it no matter what. And later on, if you had a chance to look back at that, would you not smile and say, oh my gosh, why did I defend that position? I'm not even sure why that was so important to me at the time. We use meditation to get us out of that mode of reactionary mode. And Dora had another, again, because of Harry and Dora, a lot of what I say is what I learned with them. And Dora had this wonderful suggestion, which is she would say, put a rubber band around your wrist. And every time you find yourself doing that particular thing, snap it. I thought, wow, that's a great idea. So if you have something that bothers you, that you are spending an inordinate amount of time and energy on, that you really don't want to do, put a rubber band around your wrist and maybe just give it a little tweak. So we've talked about the thought forms. I just want to say one more thing about them, and that is what I've observed is right now I'm giving you a sender, and you have receivers, and that's all etheric. Okay, so that's all part of, I can't see my own aura. I have a couple of times, and it wasn't pretty, and I didn't think I ever wanted to see it again. Yeah, it was something else. But we have these, what I observe people, they have these senders and there's receivers, and I can tell when people are in a really dynamic conversation because it's like this cord, this tube, and it's like it's dynamic between the two. In the same token, you can have receivers for barbs. Let's say you have a difficult person in your life who likes to zing you, and you have a dozen little receivers, and they zing you and zing you and zing you until 12th, and then you flare. We are our aura. We are who we are. If we practice our meditation and our loving thoughts, we tend to get there more easily. If we are a temper reactionary person, we also tend to go there very easily. But just because we're one or the other doesn't mean we need to stay there. First of all, we just need to acknowledge it. Now, if you have someone in your life who is sending you a barb, your best defense is none. You allow it to just shoot through you. You've all had the experience, you're on the road, and you know driver X is in road rage. You just know it. And you back off the pedal and say, uh-oh, I don't think I want to be around that person. You can feel that rage. Or you walk into, you know, airplane travel. You know, there's always people upset because their flight got changed or something, and they're taking it out on some poor innocent person who's trying to change their flight for them. But we can all feel that, and it can just allow it to go through us, or we can grab a hold of it. I don't want it. I don't want it. I don't want it to find a home with me. And sometimes when it's so intense, it's hard not to have it be a home, so then you remove yourself. I don't look in malls. I don't look in general. I am only looking to a degree with you. Your aura is your personal mail. I don't read it unless it's just very inadvertent, and even if it is very private and it isn't spoken to anyone. We have a right to privacy, and we have a right to be who we really are. And again, I was so fortunate. My parents helped me understand. Intuitively, I understood much of it, but because of being raised in the society and going to Round Table and going to Orcas, Camp Indralaya, I mean, I had so many safe environments for myself that it was wonderful. I know before I came here, and actually before I even agreed to come here, I couldn't believe, I mean, actually that's what my son said, my gosh, Mom, you're going public. I said, I know. However, after I arrived, I felt very comfortable. You all made me feel comfortable. You have a collective aura of you that's accepting, and I felt welcome, and I felt accepted. I didn't feel as quirky as I have many times in my past. What we want to avoid with the thought forms on the barbs back just momentarily is you don't want to get into that beautiful strong connection can also be a strong negative connection, and we don't want to feed that. Sometimes there are people in our life that we just have to wait till next lifetime. We did all we could. We did as much as we could, and we just need to say, well, I'll meet you again next lifetime, only this time don't be my whatever you were. Could you be another part of my life, maybe? Because we've all been brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers with each other, I'm sure. Many of us have seen each other many times. Meditation. I loved Dora's explanation to my husband. When we were first married, we went up to Pumpkin Hollow and Dora was there, and it was the first time that Gary had met Dora. Now, when I met Gary, I'm 19, and I met him and I was just like Mount Vesuvius. I just told him all about myself. I'd never in my whole life done it, but somehow, of course, Gary and I have been together many, many times. And so he just knew everything about me, and he knew everything I could do, and I just couldn't stop talking. I mean, you know, there were just no barriers at all. So, oh well, obviously I married the man. But after we were married, we went up to Pumpkin Hollow, and Dora was explaining to him about meditation, and what I loved was her statement about meditation is that it is an egoless state, and that it can be achieved in a moment, with a beautiful sunset, with music, with a moment of a breath. Of course, meditation is wonderful when we are all together and we're in a meditation where we are 30 minutes together and we're achieving something as a group. But individually, we can be there in a moment. And that is, I felt, so instructive Gary is a classical pianist and understood immediately what she was talking about. Although he was raised in a religion with prayer, and prayer is wonderful. Prayer is its own form of meditation. As yesterday, I loved all of the prayers that I just loved it. And I also will say that I watched, and it was really beautiful. And a few of them were absolutely incredible, what the words created. And that was fun. It was sort of like its own little lightning show. That was very nice. As Theosophists, of course, we all accept our various realms and are in appreciation of them, and also in appreciation of their place and in acceptance, total acceptance of your direction or what is comfortable for you. Very briefly, we talked, it has been brought up in terms of the chakras, and of course the chakras, there are many wonderful books on it, and I love Leadbeater and his description of chakras, and I think that's the most reasonable. And you know, they are whirling energies, and they are about this size depending on who you are, and they are in meditation aligned, and we are looking for the crown chakra. When we are open, that is when we have our most creative thought. That is when we are one with each other and one with the universe and one with this earth and trees, and we are in harmony with each other. If we are in that state, we tend to choose better for ourselves. And as we choose better, we influence those around us. We also cultivate our gardens. We create the beautiful flowers. Smells and aromas are wonderful for our brains. We want to use those energy fields in the whole balance of how we are each and every day. I think that as far as the understanding the aura, I think there isn't anything finer than Dora Kuntz's work. And I also actually at this time would like to, if I can manage this, we have a beautiful saying from her that I love, and I'll just leave that for a moment. If you've not looked at her book, I encourage you to pick it up. I noticed downstairs they have beautiful pictures of some of an artist's rendition of things that she described as far as the aura. The aura is really this, it's more like a rainbow in terms of how it looks. You know, it's this amorphous field. And healing is the balance of the body. We are in healing each and every day. We are healing a wound, either physically or emotionally. We are healing and growing ourselves each and every day. At least that's our theosophical goal. Each and every day that we are achieving something as far as an enlightened feeling, an enlightened spirit. What I like about Dora's statement is that even medically, we just remove the obstacles. It's really the body is this magnificent brain that's within all of those cells. Harry Van Gelder was my mentor and definitely a genius in this area, was able to identify each of the vibrational energies. As we talked before, we are a vibrational body. And I think that the doctor of the future will understand that maybe more clearly than they do now. And I'm speaking medical doctor of the future. In that, if we can measure each of the vibrational energies, we can also measure the vibrational energy of dis-ease or unease. Then it is our job as practitioners to reverse that unease or dis-ease and turn it not from a destructive force, but a constructive force. And in the healing aspect, we actually can measure down to the cellular level what each of the cells present. And as we are, they have done some incredible studies of I'm trying to think of the person who did the study, but there was a group, and please, if you know this information, share that with the group. There is a group in Europe, I believe, of nuns who live a very long time, clear into their hundreds, and they have given permission, they gave permission to be autopsied, their brain to be autopsied, because they were so vibrant, and they were specifically, the physicians that were involved were looking at whether or not dementia was even in these brains. And what they actually discovered is that each of these women did have forms of dementia, but because they were still studying and still learning and still growing, it didn't affect their lives. Now, isn't that something to take? We all, as we age, think about dementia. We think about it, I mean, we have so many aspects of dementia that are forth. We read all of these articles. And one of the things I always tell people is that we have thousands of pathways to the same information. Thousands of pathways to a particular phone number. Well, if you lose that phone number, it's okay. So that particular pathway got burned. Just say it 10 times and burn a new pathway. So the important thing is don't react. Just say, oh, well, never mind. I need to learn it another way. And also encourage yourself to get new information. I was amused when you were talking about, prior to the computer, one of the things, we are in a technological system in a society now, and it is important for us to keep up and to learn new things, but there's also game playing, and there's also mnemonics and things that help us in terms of keeping our brains alive and keeping our selves in balance. We are a pulsating, vibrating entity, and we want that pulsating, vibrating entity to be positive and sending out all those good vibrations. Sometimes, and I've certainly seen this many, many times, people who have difficulty with depression, we're all kind of muddy at the bottom. That's kind of where we stand. The bottom of us, is a little muddy. And it's okay, because I just feel like, well, we're next to the earth, and it's okay to be a little muddy. But sometimes with depression, it's not just mud, it's kind of a muddy gray, and it spreads. When someone is depressed and they walk into a room, you can watch it just spread like ooze. What's interesting is to see it spread and not adhere to lots, but then to some, it will come up. And then they will experience the same depression as that person. You say to yourself, I'm sure the person who's depressed isn't really trying to spread that good news. They just don't know what to do with it. Now, in the same token, you can come into a room with loving, wonderful thoughts, and it also will spread throughout the environment, and those who have those same loving, wonderful thoughts can bring it forward, and we'll all resonate lovely. Clairvoyantly, probably the easiest field to look at is the etheric. The etheric is outside of us by, 6 to 8 inches. And when we're healthy, it's fluffy. My dad used to call them feathers. He'd ask me, how are my feathers today, Robyn? And I liked that term, feathers. And as we get ill, the feathers start drooping. And as we're really ill, they become flat. And one of the things that I like is the idea that I can fluff my own feathers. And the truth is, there is some reality to that. Many of the exercise practices, like in yoga and in Tai Chi, there's lots of arm movement, and I don't do either very well, so I'm not going to pretend that I can. But there's many of those exercise programs actually are doing exactly that with breath in, breath out. We're actually energizing that particular etheric field. When we are ill, it shows in the etheric field. In fact, sometimes I can see the illness there before the person has actually manifested it physically. Besides, of course, the etheric, then of course the aura is the emotional body, and that's the one that keeps changing. We do have, as when you look at Dora's book, there are people, well, we all have symbols. Our work is sort of around us. You know, our work is sort of in the middle of us. And if you could see mine, you know, this is my work. It is this is the important work that I have in this lifetime. And it is the help of others in their own personal quest. And those of you who are, that's the thing that's wonderful about this particular arena, is that you're all of service. And that is really a beautiful sight to see. I'm not saying you don't like new shoes, but that's not your real goal. Or a pretty purse. It just isn't your goal. You're of service to this humanity, and you understand your importance in this world. And by your very nature, you bring that importance forward. And it not only shows, it touches others. Your individual position is like its own beacon. Dora did me a great favor as a youngster. My mother insisted that Dora was lovely and would occasionally grant a reading. And my mother decided that I needed to have I needed a reading by Dora. And I remember being terrified because, of course, I'm in the middle of everything, and I'm thinking, gosh, what if she looks at me and says, Robyn, you're all wet, and what you're seeing is really not there. And somehow this wonderful woman did not say that, and she validated me at a very young age, and later, as did Harry, which was wonderful. It's important, those of us who are in this position, all of you out there, as you meet others who are maybe like me or have a certain level of sensitivity, that you do validate and you do accept their words, and you do help them find the wonderful readings that are out there. I mean, our library is filled with wonderful people. I was also fortunate to meet Jeffrey Hodson very early when he was at the Portland Lodge. He was also very helpful. These are things that I think are important for us as Theosophists, that this is our role. Our goal is to keep the mechanical part of our mind. Our mind is not our brain. Our brain is the mechanical part of our mind. This is our mind. When we meditate, this is what we are aligning ourselves to open to the crown, to open all the way up and open and out, so that we can bring through the knowledge or the experience or the inspiration for our next path. Many are sometimes in a quandary in terms of what is their next best path. Meditation is your answer. You know better than anyone. We all see each other very clearly. Sometimes we don't want to see each other very clearly, but we do. We really do see each other very clearly. And it's our gift to each other to when asked an honest question, that you give an honest response. And I think we in the society maybe are more able and are more true to that response. I have been greatly influenced as a Theosophist. I am absolutely thrilled that I had the background that I did. When I put this particular program together, I had all kinds of ideas, but I finally decided that I guess it was going to occur as it was going to occur. Physical balance is a necessary part of this incarnation. And if you take full responsibility for who you are, it just naturally falls that your responsibility then inspires the next and maybe enlightens someone who hadn't even thought the way you were thinking. I would just like to leave just this portion of it so I can open up some questions. That as Theosophists, we understand our importance in this world, that we take positive action towards a universal brotherhood, peace, and harmony. And if we take those things and truly feel them in our hearts, they just naturally come out of our mouths. Can I answer any questions?
Microphone here.
You know, there is this teaching given by Krishnamurti or some other traditions about watching our emotions, that when there is a state of anger or whatever negative emotion, instead of trying to control it, you just watch it. And one doubt that is present in many people is if by watching it without trying to control it, we are not, you know, sending all those negative emotions outside to the environment. Have you seen what the effect is when somebody is watching the emotions as opposed to feeling them, identified with the emotions? Is there any difference? I don't know if you have observed that.
Good question. The limbic part of our brain is our oldest part of our brain, and it actually is an emotional center. And the first 90 seconds of an emotion, rage, is out of your control. It's the limbic system enraged. After 90 seconds, you're now in it. So it's a very good statement. You observe it. In other words, actually, what helped me about learning that information is sometimes you flare. Someone does something and you flare. But the important thing is it doesn't last beyond 90 seconds. You don't fuel it. So you actually are observing it. You acknowledge, oh, that occurred. And usually we're talking negative emotions. I don't think anybody's talking about that immense love. So 90 seconds, that's your little timeout. You can't control that first 90. Limbic took it over. We also have parts in our brain that the cingulate system, I didn't want to get into the brain anatomy, but the cingulate system is also buried in as part of the limbic system. And I've done a lot of reading on Dr. Amen's work. I really like his descriptions of many of the parts of the body and the brain and what it does. And he describes the the cingulate system as automatic negative thoughts. Okay, we've all been in those automatic negative thoughts. It's that cycle. What I usually suggest to people is there is a nugget of start. What you're looking for is what's the nugget? What set me off on that cycle? And if you can figure out the nugget, generally, in fact, I don't know any time that it doesn't dissipate. And the rubber band is a nice idea also, but I find for myself, when I'm in that automatic negative, I don't like it. It's very uncomfortable. If I can find that nugget, oh, I know what set me off, and it's generally something very inconsequential, but it just set me on that motion. So just say to yourself, oh, yes, that part of the brain, I know. It's the old part.
Anything else? Wow, everybody went up at once. Here you go.
You mentioned that almost all of us have maybe at least two people that come with us or something. I was not sure what you meant, but is that sometimes that we experience that we like hear things, not out loud, but are those the voices that we hear or the guidance?
Sometimes, yes. Yeah, we tend to, I think those of us, not so much because I've got my feet in both camps, but I've found people that I talk to will talk themselves out of it. Oh, I didn't really hear it. Now, also, we can pick up on an errant thought. Like I'm sure you've all experienced an odd thought that entered your brain. You simply read someone else's mind. And it might not be first of all, say, is that mine or is that someone else's? Was that for me or was that someone else's? These beings that we have, sometimes the beings that I see are literally beings from incarnations. We'll talk more about that tomorrow because that's developing a higher level of consciousness. But for this conversation, we have them. I have beings who help me in my work. And I also have people, my mother, I know mom and dad are here, there's no doubt. We have people that loved us, truly loved us and care about us, and your dad who pokes me, and they really care about us, and they do give us this information, and it's important to acknowledge it, and at least, okay, because they can't help us unless we ask for help. That's part of meditation also, is allowing yourself not only to be centered, but to allow yourself to, you are asking for help in this world. Does that answer? Okay.
I was wondering if you might be able to speak a little more about intent. If somebody has positive intent, has positive thoughts about a situation or a person, and doesn't act on it, but just thinks, how does that affect your brain, or is something else communicated, or is the same for the negative without acting, just the thought of a negative and a positive? What does that affect, or what might that effect be on our brains?
Well, I know that when you continually listen to the words that you say about yourself, listen to your silent words. They're very important. Listen to your criticisms. We are far too critical, far too self-critical. It's very difficult to balance when you are beating yourself with negativity. Oh, you couldn't do this, or something negative. Intent is eventually verbalized, if not in words, in action. Listen to your words. They're very powerful. Did that answer your question? Okay.
Hi. What made me think of this is you were talking about when people are kind of muddy at the base of their aura, kind of sad or depressed. And I'm not talking about with Dr. Amen. He talks about crushing your ants.
Yeah.
Your
yes,
automatic
yes.
negative thoughts.
Yes, yes.
I'm talking about people with like clinical depression, that kind of thing. What would be the best thing for, and all of us here are good people. I'm not talking about someone who's given up on themselves. If they had like a great deal of sadness, how would they approach correcting that? There's still a level of them who's trying to be good, but they're weighed down. So I guess in a lot of this kind of talk, people don't address clinical depression so much. They talk about just sad emotions. So I'd like to hear your take on that.
On clinical depression.
Yes.
Clinical depression is a disease. And as any disease, it has its own character. And no one who is clinically depressed wants to be. And there are times that it is important, again, I'm very practical, there are times we need chemical interference with such things. I have had patients that I have urged to get chemical help because nothing naturally helps them. Sometimes there are misfirings in the brain. Clinical depression is a misfiring. It is, and we're talking the diseased clinical depression that leads you to suicidal thoughts, and no one wants to be there. You need help with someone that you can talk to. You need a therapist that you feel comfortable with to help you in this journey to not be clinically depressed. Now, interestingly, let's talk about suicide. My experience with suicide is that when someone has chosen suicide, it is an attractive choice, and it is difficult the next lifetime not to choose it again. It is its own, well, I'm controlling my death. I have worked with people who literally every day work at not making this choice. Now, I think, you know, when I've done the look and the help of looking back, I realize they've chosen that route over and over and over, and their great feat this lifetime will be to live their full life. Now, in my explanation, as I was growing up, when I was talking about lifetimes, and when my teachers told me that, okay, if we look at our lifetime as 180 degrees, we're born, and a good 170 degrees is life. Well, but there's that 10% that's not. We are of free choice. We choose every day what we wish to do. And sometimes those choices put us in harm's way, so that 180 degrees, maybe my full lifetime, I had a dad who lived to be 95, I had a grandmother who lived to be 100. I told my son, I'm very sorry, but I'm probably going to be here a long time. Assuming I continue to make maybe choices that are healthy for me. But what if I started making choices that weren't healthy for me? I am then going towards another level which ends the lifetime sooner than it maybe would have here. The suicides come in with the same 180 degrees. I don't know why I call it, that was how it was described to me. The full 180 degrees, but they keep shortening it. So their goal is to see if they can make it all the way to the end. Did that help? Change. Now let's talk about non-clinical depression. I don't know anyone who can make a change without it being through love. No one changes by being critical. And that is important for self. If I wish to make a change to not be a perfectionist, then I need to lovingly tell myself not to do things like sew, because that brings out that horrible perception. You know, last time I brought out something to sew, Gary said, please, could I go buy you a skirt? Not a nice person when you're sewing. Lovingly making changes. Yes.
I had a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It seems like a very popular and seemingly effective healing modality that's become quite recognized these days. Is it EFT?
Yes.
Emotion. Are you familiar with that?
Not enough to.
Okay. I was just wondering if you could comment on if you had observed it, or if there was anything you could say toward that. And if not, that's okay.
No, that's the tapping, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes. I have had some patients who have had some incredibly positive responses, and I used to refer to a therapist who did that. And she, as it was described, I think she tapped various places, and that it was incredibly, an incredibly positive way to make a change. I liked her work, and then she didn't go into practice or left practice, and I don't have anyone else to refer to. So that's all my knowledge of it, but it seemed very good at the time.
In your work that you've done, have you had any experience working with veterans with PTSD?
Yes.
Tell me about that.
Now we're talking chemical change. We're talking brain chemical change. We can have enough shock to the system. Harry taught me early in my life about concussions, and taught me how to figure out whether a person had experienced a concussion and that was an undiagnosed concussion, because so many concussions or traumas would lead to disease. That is a case of an emotional blow that's happened over and over. It's taken that person not only out of their comfort zone, it blew them out of their comfort zone, and they got into a zone that they couldn't handle. So now it's become a chemical change in the brain, and they fall in the same category as the clinical depression. We have to change the chemicals. Now, in some cases, I have worked effectively with, I have a variety of therapeutic exercises and supplements and homeopathics. I work a lot as a homeopath that have been very effective. It depends on the patient. It depends on, number one, if they acknowledge if they acknowledge it. Number two, if they are willing to do the work. And some are self-medicating. Every patient I've ever had who has been addicted it's all self-medication. They just don't feel normal. They want to feel normal. They're just trying to feel normal. And so they found that this helped them, and then pretty soon it didn't help them, and then it became something else. So it did become a chemical change.
This one's lighter. The Edgar Cayce, clairvoyant, recommended that the people come up with a balance. We're talking balance here. So with an ideal of the physical, mental, and spiritual life that they lead. And I just wondered if you would comment on the concept of ideal.
Yes. Ideal for me is when I am in a truly meditative place. That is when I am open, I'm hearing, I'm listening, and I'm presenting. I've done a lot of study of Edgar Cayce. I've suggested many things Edgar Cayce. I think he was brilliant in many things he suggested. I tend not to suggest to people to think of their ideal. I'm sorry, every time I think of ideal, I think Hollywood, you know, and that's like, blah. Not an ideal, yeah. So ideal for me is when I am one with me, when I am completely outside of inconsequential things. When I am in the other world, there is no space-time. It does not exist. And when you allow me to look at you, there is no space-time. I'm just seeing who you are and experiencing who you are, and you're very lovely. So ideal is your ideal, your non-critical ideal.
Anyone else?
I'd like to follow up one additional step on the PTSD. If you see it as a chemical change in the brain, how do you address that? How do you get its attention?
Okay. Well, first of all, if you are a patient in my office, you have given me a permission to look at you entirely, which also means you've given me permission to communicate with the true you, not necessarily the person that's sitting on the table. And sometimes the communication has to start with the true you before it can happen to the physical you. Sometimes physical you is completely blocked off from the real you. When I was a little girl, I used to, of course I used sight sometimes for entertainment, but it was educationally entertaining. You understand, I would sometimes be waiting for someone and I'd be sitting, and one of the most interesting things as a child was to see someone who was severely disabled, I mean really disabled, who was, twisted up in themselves, or a child. Often it was the children. I was so interested in, this person. And always the real person would, I would say all but maybe 2 times did I experience the real entity of this person who was beaming, smiling, and saying, "Look how good she's doing." In other words, they've taken this and they're going with it. So this lifetime, this was their challenge. Because we all know it's not our good days, it's our challenging days that define us. That's what really defines us. It's all of those challenges we have. So in that particular case, the challenge is maybe first to contact that to see how we can make that connection. If you're a patient in my office, you're already knowing that I have some ability. If you are, yes, I have some ability. Most of them do. And so then that's where the communication begins. Because sometimes they're just completely cut off.
I want to ask a question about metaphysical healing in one's lifetime. So we talk about from trauma, psychological healing, whatnot. Do you have any examples, or have you seen any possibilities of any people who, just had decades of criticism leveled at them? Either they grew up that way, where it's just constant criticism, negativity in the home, and maybe their work past led them to continue being in that situation one way or the other, their choices, whatnot. Have you witnessed anyone who's faced their psychological trauma and healing completely heal in a metaphysical sense, to where that person ended up being the person that he or she was when he or she came into this world, or the person that he or she was meant to be when they came into this world? Have you seen a complete healing of anyone that grew up or was subject to intense criticism over decades?
Yes. But let's first say, sometimes this is an incarnation. This karmic incarnation may very well have begun the last one, and you're finishing it this time. And you may be finishing it up until your last breath. But you don't have to come back and do it again. This was the thing I loved about Linda Jo. She said, "I'm just trying to help the next Linda Jo have a better and easier time." And I thought, oh, that's a great idea. Because, I've been a Robyn or a Robert or I've been a lot of things. And I'm just hoping, which is I am respectful of what I have, and I hope next lifetime I get to have it again, so that I can continue on this path of knowledge. And maybe next lifetime I'll be incarnated where everybody is, and we just talk about it. I mean, remember Harry talking about growing up in the manor and how they would be given this, given a challenge, and then they would go into their meditative state, and then they'd come out of it, and then they would tell each other, what they did. And I just thought, oh, how I was jealous, so those are probably the funny colors. And because I wished so much I could have been in there and not so isolated. A lot of you have sensitivities, but I very rarely do not see a child that is not clairvoyant. You know, children are, along with animals, not just cats. And it's you know, that's how we communicate with our animals, our dogs, our cats. I mean, they see our intent. They may or may not understand our words, but they certainly see our intent. But yes, I have seen a healing.
In terms of service, when you're working with a patient, or have you worked with patients where you've been able to either prescribe or observe them, going from a self-centered energetic state to maybe a state of service, whether, I don't know, they're taking care of a pet or a child, or doing some sort of community service, that type of thing. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's like, in a self-centered state, you may feel sorry for yourself, but yet then the shift that happens when you go into a service state, were you able to observe that type of?
Yes, definitely. By the time, if you've elected to come into my world, you've already understood there's something wrong in your world, and you're just trying to understand how to get from that world to this world, because the world you're in is very uncomfortable. Even if it's just a spinal complaint, it's just uncomfortable and you want to reach to another world. I tend not to have as patients those that are so self-centered that they aren't of service, and I don't have friends that are anything but in service. I have acquaintances who are like that, and they only know this much of me. But yeah, I think yes, I have observed that. We all have our challenges, and sometimes it's through the challenge that we understand where we really are. And we would like to think that we are maybe someplace different than we are, but it is when it's really front and center, that's who we truly are. The interesting thing is when we die, the experience I've had with people that I get to see again, like my mom, after my mom passed away, she, for a long time, was still the same age that she was when she died, but now she's really very young. She's much younger. This is my dad. And, you know, and I remember when I was working with a very sweet, wonderful man, Ozzy B., and I asked him, so Ozzy, how old are you going to be? And Ozzy, if all of you who knew Ozzy, I remember as a young girl, Ozzy, and we just thought he was a heartthrob. I mean, he was just this very, very handsome man. And he said, oh, I don't know, probably my 50s. And I thought, isn't that interesting? So he wasn't identified at all when he was 20s or 25. I had a patient a very woman who was Baptist and was very strong as a Baptist, but somehow she understood that I had a little something extra, although we never spoke of it. And she was ill and allowed me to come and see her at the end, or actually asked me to come and see her at the end. And then in her she was a very large girl, and in her passing, she showed up in my bedroom and said, oh, look at me. And she had rolled up sleeves, so it must have been like when she was a teenager, and she must have been maybe the only time in her life when she was really slender. So that was what she was identifying with. Oh, look how good I look. And then that was the last time I never saw her again, so I thought it was kind of interesting.